Janmadhyasya yutoniriyat itaratas Chatesya vidyasmarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikavaye Muyanti Yat Surayaha
Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikavaye Muyanti Yat Surayaha
Tejo Varimidam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Misha
Tejo Varimidam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Misha
Damna Svena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi
Damna Svena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi.
O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of
O all-pervading personality of Godhead.
O all-pervading personality.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute
and
truth.
the primeval cause of all causes.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
Of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universe.
The creation, sustenance, and destruction of manifested universe.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him.
And he is independent because there is no other cause.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahma.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahma.
The original living
the
being.
original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
As one bewildered by the illusory representations.
Of water seen on fire, or land seen on water.
Water seen on fire, land seen on water.
Only because of him do the material universe.
Only because of him do the material universe.
Temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature.
Temporarily manifested by the reactions.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
Appear factual, although they are
I
unreal.
therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna.
I therefore meditate upon Lord Shri
who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode.
Who is eternally existent in the transcendental.
Which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world.
Which is forever free from the illusory representations.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute
Dharma
truth.
projita kaitravudra.
Dharma projita kaitravudra.
Paramo nirmatsaranam.
Paramo nirmatsaranam.
Vedyam vastavam atravasta.
Vedyam vastavam atravasta.
Shivadam tapatrayon bhava.
Shivadam tapo.
Srimad Bhagvatam Mahamani.
Srimad Bhagvatam Mahamani.
Kim vapurir
Kim
ishvara.
vapurir ishvara.
Sadyo hridya avurijate tra.
Sadyo hridya avurijate tra.
Priti bihi completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
Completely rejecting all religious activities.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest
which
truth.
is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in
Which
heart.
is understandable by those who are fully pure in
The
heart.
highest truth is reality distinguished from an illusion for the welfare.
The highest truth, the reality distinguished from illusion for
Such
the
truth
welfare.
uproots the threefold
Such a
miseries.
truth uproots the threefold
This beautiful
miseries.
Bhagavatam compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled with the great sage Vyasadeva
is
in
sufficient in
maturity.
itself for God
It's
realization.
sufficient itself for God.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scripture?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of
As
Bhagavatam,
soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of
by this
Bhagavatam,
culture of knowledge,
By this
the
culture
Supreme
of
Lord is established within his heart.
Supreme Lord is established within his
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
Nigama kalpator garitam
Sukhamukad amrita dravya samyutam.
Sukhamukhar
Pibata Bhagavatam rasamalayam.
Pibata Bhagavatam
Mugur
Rasam
aho raska bhuvibhavaka.
Muraho Rasika.
O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad
O
Bhagavatam.
expert and thoughtful and relish my
The mature fruit of the desired true Vedic
mature
literature.
fruit desired through Vedic
It
literature.
emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
It emanated from the lips of Sishugadeva.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Therefore, this fruit has become even
Although
more
its
tasteful.
nectarine juice was already relishable for
Although
all,
his nectarine juice was so relishable for all,
including liberated souls.
including liberated souls.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna,
Shrimvatam Swakata
Punya
Krishna.
Shravana Kirtana,
Punyashravana Kirtana.
Hridyantak Stohi Badani,
Hridyantastu Hyabhadra.
Vidunati Srihitsatam.
Vidunati Suritsatam.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic
To hear
literature,
about Krishna from the
or to
Vedic
hear from
literature,
him directly through the Bhagavad
or to
Gita,
hear from him directly through
is
the Bhagavad
itself righteous
Gita. It is
activity.
self-righteous.
And for one who hears about
And
Krishna,
who hears about Krishna,
Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart,
Lord Krishna is dwelling within everyone's
acts
heart.
as a best wishing friend
Acts as the best wishing
and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him.
and it purifies the what you constantly engage in.
Nasta Presu Abhadresu
Nasta Presha Bhadresu.
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata
Bhagavati
Seva.
Tamasloke
Bhagavati
Bhaktir
Utamashloki.
Bhavati Naistaki.
Bhagavati Nasti.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant
In
transcendental
this way,
knowledge.
the watch naturally develop dormant transcendental.
As he hears more about Krishna from the
As
Bhagavatam
he hears more about Krishna from the
and
Bhagavatam,
from the devotees,
from the
he
devotees,
becomes fixed in the devotional
he
service of
becomes
the Lord.
fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
Tadarajastamo Bhava
Tadarajastamo bhava.
Kamalobhadayaschaye
Kamalobhadayaschaye.
Chaitetaranabhidam
Chaitaitaranavidam.
Stitvam Sattve
Stitam
Prasiddhiti.
sadve prasidi.
By development of devotional
By
service,
development of
one
devotional
becomes
service.
freed from the modes of passion and ignorance.
One becomes freed from the modes of passion.
And thus material lust and avarice avarice are diminished.
And this material lust and avarice.
Evam prasana manasa
Evam prasana
Bhagavad
manasa,
Bhakti Yogataha Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam
Bhakti Tattva Vijnanam,
Mukta Sangasya Jayate.
Mukta
When these
Sangasya
impurities are
Jayate.
wiped
When
away,
these impurities
the
are wiped
candidate remains steady in his position of pure
away, and it
goodness,
remains steady in position of
becomes
pure
enlivened by devotional service,
goodness,
and
becomes
understands the
enlivened
science of God
and
perfectly.
understands the science of God perfectly.
Vidyate Hridaya Grantis
Vidyate Hridaya Grantis,
Chidyante Sarvasamsaya
Chidyante Sarva
Shiyante Jasya Karmani
Yante
Drista
Chachakamani,
Evat Manishwari.
Drista Evan Manishwari.
Thus Bhakti Yoga severs the heart not of material
Thus the
affection,
Bhakti Yoga serves the heart of the material
and enables
affection,
one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram,
and enables one to come at once to the stage of assumption,
understanding of the supreme absolute truth personality of
and
Godhead.
understanding of the supreme absolute true personality of Godhead.
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna, from his devotees, Krishna
can one
consciousness,
understand the science of Krishna.
can one understand the science of Krishna.
Shri Guru Vastika prayers ki jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it.
The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean master, just as a cloud pours water on the forest fire.
So the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence.
So the spiritual master delivers the material afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material
I, from my
existence.
respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet, such a spiritual master is an ocean of auspicious qualities.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master which is in the ocean of
Chanting the
auspicious-
holy name, dancing, ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments.
chanting the holy name, dancing, ecstasy, singing, and playing musical instruments.
The spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord
The
Chaitanya
spiritual master is
Mahaprabhu,
always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu,
because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind.
because he's relishing the mellows of pure devotion within
Sometimes
his
his hair stands on end.
mind. Sometimes his hair
He
stands
feels
on end.
quivering in his
He
body,
feels quivering in
and
his
tears
body,
flow from his eyes like
and
waves.
tears from his eyes like
I,
waves.
from my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto Lotus feet of such a spirit.
The spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Shri Radha and
The
Krishna.
spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Shri Radha.
He also engages his disciples in such worship.
He also engages his disciples in such
They
worship.
dress the deities in beautiful clothes and
They
ornaments,
dress the deities in beautiful clothes and
clean their
ornaments,
temple,
clean the temple,
and perform other similar
and
worship. of the
perform
Lord.
other sim.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual
I
master.
offer my respectful obeisance unto Lotus feet of
The
such a
spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of
The spiritual
delicious
master
food.
always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food.
Analyzes that which is leaked, chewed, drunk, and sold.
Another that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked.
When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasad,
When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad,
he is
he
satisfied.
is satisfied.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual
I
master.
offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and
This
Madhava,
spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastime of Radhika Madhava,
and their qualities, names, and
and the
forms.
qualities, names,
The
and
spiritual
forms.
master aspires to relish these at every
The
moment.
spiritual master aspires to relish these at every
I
moment.
offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such
I
a
offer my
spiritual
respectful
master.
obeisance unto the Lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert in assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan.
The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert in assisting the gopis who in different time make different tasteful arrangements perfection of Radha Krishna conjugal loving affairs within the groves of
I offer
Vrindavan.
my most humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my most humble obeisance unto the Lotus feet of such a
The
spiritual
spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the
The
Lord.
spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord.
This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities.
This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities.
Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master as a bona fide representative of Shri Hare Krishna.
Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance to the Lord, to such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Shri Hare Krishna.
By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna.
By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction.
Without
of
the
Krishna.
grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advance.
Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advance.
Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master.
Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master.
At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master.
At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance to the Lord, to my spiritual master.
Shri Brahma Samhita ki jai. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadirati Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam.
Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam.
Chintamani Prakata Satma Sukalpa Vriksha.
Chintamani Prakadasanma Sukalpa Vriksha.
Laksha Vrite Surabhira Vipaliyantam.
Lakya Vritesha Surabhira Vipalayan.
Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambrahma Sevyamanam.
Lakshmi Sahasha Satasambra Masih.
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami.
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham.
Venum Kvananta Arvinda Dalayataksham
Venu Kvanantam Aravinda Dalayata
Parhavatam Samasitam Buddhasundarangam
Arambatasam Sitam Buddha Sundaram
Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Visesha Sobam
Kandarpakoti Kamaniya Vishesha Shobham
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Hari Purusham Tamam
Alola Chandrakala Sadvanamalya Vamsi
Alola Chandrakala Sarvanamalya Vamsi
Ratnam Gidam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam
Ranangadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam
Shamam Chimangalalitam Niyataprakasam
Syamam Tribhangala Litam Niyata Prakasam
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Hari Purusham Tamam
Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti
Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti
Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiram Jaganti
Pasyanti Kanti Kalayanti Chiram Jaganti
Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya
Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Advaitam Achyutam Anadi Mananta Rupam
Advitam Achyutam Anadi Mananta Rupam
Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha
Adyam Purana Purusham Navajovanam
Vedesa Durlabam Adurlabam Atma Bhakto
Vedesha Durlabham Adurlabham Atma
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham
Pantastu Koti Satavatsara Sampragamyo
Pantastu Koti Sadavatsara Sampragam
Vayuratapi Manasomuni Pungamanam
Vayuratapi Manasomuni Pungamanam
Sopyasti Yat Prapadasimya Vichintya Tatve
Sopyasti Yat Prapadasimya Vichintya
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham
Ekobhya Sora Chaitam Jagaranda Koti
Ekobhya Sora Chitum Jagadanda Koti
Ischakti Rasti Jagaranda Chaya Yadanta
Ischakti Rasti Jagananda Chaya Yadanta
Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam
Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham
Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajastataiva
Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajastataiva
Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusaha
Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusha
Suktaryam Eva Nikama Pratitaistuvanti
Sukteya Eda Nigama Prasitestu Vanti
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Ananda Chinmaya Rasapati Bhavitabhis
Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavita
Tabirya Eva Nija Rupa Taya Kalabhihi
Avirya Eva Nija Rupa Taya Kalavi
Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto
Goloka Eva Nivasatya Kilatma
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham
Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena
Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochana
Santaksadeva Hidesu Vilokayanti
Santasadeva Viloyati
Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam
Yam Syama Sundaram Achinta Gunaswarupam
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham
Ramadi Murti Sukalani Menatistan
Ramadi Murti Sukalani Yamena Tishtan
Nanavatara Makarod Bhuvane Sukintu
Nana Vatara Kamarod Bhuvaneshi
Krishna Swayam Samabhavad Paramaha Pumamyo
Krishna Swayam Sambhavat Paramam Pumam
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham
Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagananda Koti
Yasya Prabha Prabhavatu Jagananda Kuti
Koti Svaseshu Vasudadi Vibhuti Binam
Kotyasva Shesha Vasudari Vibhuti Vinam
Tad Brahmanisklamanantam Ashesha Bhutam
Brahman Saskalam Anantam Shesha
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham
Maya Hiyasya Jagananda Satani Sute
Maya Yasha Jagananda Satani Suti
Trigunya Tad Vishaya Veda Vitaya Mana
Triguna Tadi Savida
Sattva-valambi Parasattvam Visuddha Sattvam
Sarvavalambi Parasattam Visuddha
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham
Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Mataya Manasu
Ananda Chinmaya Rasapat
Yapraninam Pratifalam Smaratam Upetya Lilaya Tena Bhuvanani Jayat Yajasram Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham
Goloka Namni Nijadamni Tale Chatasya
Goloka Namni Nijadamni Tali Chatasya
Devi Mahesa Haridama Sate Satesa
Devi Mahesha Haridhama Sutesha
Tete Prabhavani Chaya Vitascha Yena Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Shastistate Pralaya Sadhava Saktireka
Siti Siti Prayata
Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga
Jaye Vayasha Bhuvanani Vibharti
Ichanu Rupam Apiyasya Chichesta Tesa
Janu
Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Shiranyata Shiram Yata Dadivikara Visesa Yoga Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasti Hetaho Yasambutam Apitata Samupaiti Karya Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Dipachareva Hitasantanam Abhyupetya Dipayate Vivita Hetu Samanu Dharma Yastadrigeva Hicha Vishnu Taya Vibhati Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yakarna Narna Vajale Bhajatisma Yoga Nidramananta Jagadanda Saroma Kupaha Adhara Shakti Avalambya Param Swamurtim Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yasyaika Nishvasita Kala Matavalambya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagananda Nataha Vishnu Mahansahi Yasya Kala Vishesho Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Basman Yatasma Yadmitasma Sakaleshu Nijesu Tejaha Sriyam Kiyat Prakatayat Apitadvadatra Brahma Ya Esa Jagananda Vidana Karta Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Pada Palava Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha Dvande Pranama Samayesa Kanadi Rajaha Vignan Vihantam Alamasya Jagatrayasya Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Agnir Mahiga Ganamambu Marudisascha Kalasta Tatma Manasitti Jagatrayani Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Visanti Yamcha Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yatchak Suresa Savita Sakalagrahanam Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesa Tejaha Yasya Gaya Brahmati Sambrita Kala Chakro Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Dharmo Tapapa Nichaya Srutayastapamsi Brahmadikita Patagava Deyasta Jivaha Yadata Matra Vibhava Prakata Prabhava Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yastrindra Gopa Matavendra Mahosvakarma Bandhanu Rupa Falabhajana Matanoti Karmani Nidhati Kinchu Bhakti Bhajam Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayadi Bitti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaurava Sevya Bhava Hai Sanchintya Tasya Sadrisim Tanam Apurete Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Shriya Kanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataramo Druma Bhumish Chintamani Ganamayi Toyam Amritam Kata Ganam Natyam Gamanam Apivam Sipriyasaki Chid Anandam Jyoti Param Apitad Aswadyam Apicha Sayacha Shiradi Bihi Shravati Surabi Byascha Sumahan Nime Sardakyo Vavrachiti Nahi Atrapit Samaya Vajay Svita Dvipam Tamaham Iha Golakam Itiyam Vedantaste Santakshiti Viravacharaka Paye Shishupanishad Ki Jai Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate.
Om Purnam Ada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purna Ivashyate.
Shivaishamidam Sarvam Jatkinja Jagatyam Jagat Tena Bunjitaha Magritaha Kasisviddanam.
Shivashamidam Sarvam Yatkincha Jagatyam Jagat Tena Tektena Bunjita Magritaha Kasisviddanam.
Kurvani Vakarmani Jiva Chekchatam Samaha Evam Tvayi Nanyatitosti Nakarma Lipite Nare.
Kurvan Evya Karmani Jiviche Chatam Sama Evam Twayi Anantate Nosti Nakarma Lipyate Nare.
Suryanamate Loka Andena Tamasavritaha Tamste Pritya Bhikichanti Yekechat Mahano Janaha.
Asuryanamate Loka Andena Tamasavritaha Tamste Pritya Bhikichanti Yekechat Mahano Janaha.
Anajadika Manaso Javiyo Nena Devam Apravam Pravam Rasata Davato Nyanateti Testat Tasmin Apunwata Visvadadati.
Anejade Kamanaso Javiyo Nenam Deva Purvutam Bhupravam Asat Tad Davatonya Ityeti Tistat Tasmin Apu Matashradati.
Tadejati Tanejati Tadure Tadvantike Tadantarasya Sarvasya Tadu Sarvasya Bayataha.
Tarijati Tam Ejati Tadure Antike Tarantarasya Sarvasya Tanu Asarvasya Sabayata.
Yastu Sarvani Bhutani Atmani Vanupasyati Sarvabhute Sachatmanam Tatona Vijigupsate.
Yastu Sarvani Bhutani Atmani Evanupapsanti Sarvabhuteshu Manam Tano Navijigupsati.
Yasmin Sarvani Bhutani Abneva Budvijanataha Tatrako Mahakaha Soka Ekatvam Anupasyata.
Yasmin Sarvani Bhutani Atmaviva Budvijanataha Tatutukumo Anukoshoka Atatvam Anupavsataha.
Saprayagat Shukamakaya Mavranam Asnaviram Sudam Apapalvidam Kavil Manisi Paribu Swayambhu Yatatat Yatorutan Vyadadat Chasvatipyaha Samabhyaha.
Saparagat Chukram Akayam Abranam Asnaviram Sudam Apapavidam Kavil Manisi Prabhu Swayambhu Vitata Yoditam Vadayachat
Andam Tamaha Pravisanti Ye Vidyam Upasyate Tato Bhuya Vitetamo Yayu Vidyayam Rataha.
Andam Tama Prasushanti Ye Vidyam Upasate Tatuguya Ibate Tamo Ya Uja Vidyayam Rata.
Anya Devaha Vidyaya Anya Dahura Vidyaya Iti Susruma Dhiranam Yenastad Vichachakshire.
Anya Deva Vidyaya Nyadaur Avidyaya Iti Shushuma Dhiranam Neyastad Avichachakshire.
Vidyam cha yas yastad vedovayam saha vidyaya miritam tirtva vidyayam ritamasnute.
Vidyam Chayas Tarivino Daya Pisaha Avidyam Richo Tirvam Vidyayam Ritasne.
Andam tamaha pravisanti ye sambutim apasyate tato bhuya vitetamo yayu sambutam rataha.
Adam Tama Vishanti Ye Sambutim Upasate Tato Bhuya Ivate Tamo Ya Usam Buddhyam Rataha.
Anya devaha sambhavat anya dahura sambhavat iti susrumadhiranam yenastad vichachakshire.
Anya Deva Sambhavat Anya Rahu Asambhavat Iti Shushuma Dhiranam Yenastata Vikshari.
Sambutim cha vinasam cha yastad vedovayam saha vidyaya avinasena mritum tirtva vidyayam sambutam ritamasnute.
Samutim Chavita Shashasa Yatavido Dayam Saha Vinasena Mrityo Tizva Sambutyam Ritamasune.
Hiranmayana patrina satyasya pitam mukam tatvam pusam apavrinus satyadharma yadristaye.
Iranmayena Pratina Satya Pitamukam Tatvam Pusam Avavino Satya Dharma Shatustaye.
Sani kaseya masruya prajapatya vyuha rasmin samaha tejo yat te rupam kayanatamam tate pasyami yosavaso purushaha sohamasmi.
Pustane Karchi Yama Surya Prajapatya Viyus Rasmin Samoha Tejo Zeta Rupa Kalyana Tamam Tate Pasyami Yosamaso Purusha Yo
Vayuranilam amritam atedam basmantam sarinam om kratus smara kritam smara kratus smara kritam smara.
Vayurani Lamamritam Adedam Basmatam Shriram Om Kratushmara Kritashmara Kratushmara Kritashmara.
Om Agninaya Supatara Yasman Vishwani Deva Vayunani Vidvan Yo Dajmas Juhuranami no Buyistam Te Nama Uktim Vidima Om Tat Sat.
Om Agneya Jasupatarayi Rasman Vishwani Deva Vayunani Vidam Viyodis Asmada Gurujarana Meno Gushrutam Te Nama Uktam Videma.
Srimad Bhagvatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, Text 27. There is no doubt about Lord Krishna's being the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, how was it possible for him to kill a giant demon like Putana when he was just on the lap of his mother? To overturn a cart with his leg when he was only 3 months old? To uproot a pair of Arjuna trees so high that they touched the sky when he was only crawling? All these activities are impossible for anyone other than the Lord himself. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So, continuing again and hearing about the unique qualities of Lord Krishna. And yesterday we began to talk about this special verse, 10th canto, 13th verse, 53rd, 13th chapter, 53rd verse. Then Lord Brahma saw that Kala, the time factor, Swabhava, one's own nature by association, Sankara, reformation, Kama, desire, Karma, fruit of activities, fruit of activity, and the gunas, the 3 modes of material nature, their own independence being completely subordinate to the potency of the Lord, had all taken forms and were also worshipping those Vishnu Murtis. Well, this is a very, very significant verse because it is demonstrating how everything, time, and corollaries of time, like Swabhava, which is one's own nature by association, and there's a higher Swabhava or Sat Swabhava and a lower Swabhava or Asat Swabhava. And then, and that's explained in Bhagavad Gita. And we'll go over that in a second. Then there's the samskaras, the reformation. That means at different stages of life, one goes through certain purificatory rituals to help one stay on the path of going back to Godhead. These are called the samskaras. The Catholics have the same thing. They call them the sacraments. And there are different ceremonies that they perform at different times of life. Like, for example, when a child is still rather young, I remember I went through this, one is baptized. In other words, they sort of bathe you in sacred water and anoint your body with special oils. And it's like when the child is purified and takes up spiritual life. Right? It's in the Catholic Church, it's in the Orthodox Church. And then there's also confession, this thing and that thing. They have, I think, 10 or more sacraments. And the Vedas tradition, they have the samskaras, such as marriage is one also in Vedas, as well as the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And they have, the first grains, and all these things are ceremonies that perform to purify one in different stages of life. And those are called samskaras. Now, there's 2 levels of samskaras. There's samskaras when one is still attached to the material world, and there's samskaras when one is transcendental to the modes of material nature. We'll discuss in a second. And then next is the kama, desire. This is the desires from a previous life that force one to do things in this life. Right? And then you have karma, fruit of activity. People develop new desires through bad association or good association. And then there's finally the gunas, the 3 modes of material nature. So actually, contrary to what people think, no one is independent in this world. And not only people are not independent, also time is not independent of Krishna, and the corollary effects of time, this is swabhava, samskara, kama, and karma, and guna. They are also persons. Actually, they're personifications of them. Nothing is impersonal in the spiritual world or the material world. And they are all subordinate to the Lord. So, in the purport, it says, no one but Vishnu has any independence. If we develop consciousness of this fact, then we are in actual Krishna consciousness. Now this is a big statement. Everyone believes that they're independent, right? And because of that, they make all kinds of decisions based on speculation and so forth. And they create new karmas that forces them to take birth again. But this is explained wonderfully in the Bhagavad Gita, in verse 13th chapter, 21st verse, and 13th chapter, 22nd verse. So it says that karya karanam kartritve hetur prakriti uchyate purusha sukhadukanam bhoktritve hetur uchyate. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So as long as we are bewildered by desire and hate, we're overcome by dualities, and we begin to believe things that are not true, such as, we're independent. We're not independent at all. Everything we do, as long as we are in the illusion, we're forced to do. Like, for example, in the animals, there's no doubt about this, right? But even in human beings, as long as we are still under the influence of the three modes of material nature, we still have unfinished material desires, and we still engage in domineering and exploiting material nature and our own senses for sense gratification. We are actually being forced to act. We are not independent. It's only when one can bring under control, or not bring under control, when one can purify their desires to desiring only to please Krishna, and how do they do that? And that's going to be explained. This is all explained in the 13th chapter. That's only by regularly hearing on a daily basis Vedic knowledge spoken by genuine devotees. And hearing what? Hearing the purports, especially in ISKCON, hearing the purports given by Srila Prabhupada and the translation of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, as well as Srimad Bhagvatam verses and Srimad Bhagvatam purports by Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's purports are an amalgam of all previous statements by Krishna himself and the acharyas. Everything is scientifically validated by Prabhupada in his purports. He'll always give the references to everything he says so that one can know that this is a fact. So this 1321 basically makes it clear that, for example, the body is the effect of the senses, and the senses are instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total, the body and instrument senses, are offered by material nature, and as will be clear in the next verse, the living entity is blessed or damned with circumstances according to his past desire and activity. According to one's desires and actions and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters, meaning bodies. The being himself is the cause of his attaining such residential quarters, and in other words, the desires that one has will place one in a certain type of body, and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. And so and we always have a mixed bag of happiness and distress, of karmic reactions. So once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the control of nature, because the body, being matter, acts according to the laws of nature. Okay, so that's definitely 100% sure in the case of animals. In the case of human beings, it's also 100% sure, unless they take to the process of hearing on a regular basis, that can purify their desires. Nothing else can purify the desires. You can go on pilgrimage. You can, engage in fasting. You can, even chant a lot of rounds, right? But one becomes, the desires are purified by this hearing. So that's why when you chant, you should chant so that you can hear yourself at least. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. You have this closed circuit. You're vibrating and with your tongue, and the sound is also going in your ear and also in the ear of someone who's next to you. That's the minimal. Silent chanting, you can do that, but it's not as effective as chanting loud enough so at least you can hear and someone near you can hear also. And then when we go in Sankirtan, we chant as loud as we can so that everyone can hear, right? So this hearing of Vedic knowledge spoken by genuine devotees as well as the holy name is purifying. It purifies our desires. So then it says, once placed in some particular kind of body, one comes under the control of nature because the body, being matter, acts according to the laws of nature. At that time, the living entity has no power to change that law. Okay, it's the law of nature. Once you're in a certain body, you're going to be controlled completely by nature. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. As soon as he is put into the body of a dog, he must act like a dog. He cannot act otherwise. And if the living entity is put into the body of a hog, then he is forced to eat stool and act like a hog. Similarly, if the living entity is put into the body of a demigod, he must act according to his body. This is the law of nature. But in all circumstances, the supersoul is with the individual soul. That is explained in the Vedas, Mundaka Upanishad, where it says, Dwa Suparna Sayuja Sakaya. The Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he always accompanies the individual soul and in all circumstances is present as the super soul or Paramatma. Okay, so mostly this is referring to people who take birth in bodies of lower than human being, but he also mentions, a demigod. So whether one is in a demigod body or a regular human body or animal body, as long as they have material desires, they're being controlled by the laws of nature, and they have to act in certain ways. They cannot escape. However, the next verse says, Purusha prakritisto hi bhunkte prakriti jan guna karanam guna sangasya sadasad yoni janmasu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. Now this is a huge verse, and the purport is extremely significant for us. This verse is very important for an understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another. It is explained in the second chapter that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another just as one changes dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment to material existence. As long as he is captivated by this false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another due to his desire to lord it over material nature. He is put into such undesirable circumstances. Under the influence of material desire, the entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, as a bird, as a worm, as an aquatic, as a saintly man, as a bug. This is going on. And in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstances, yet he is under the influence of material nature. How he is put into such different bodies is explained here. It is due to association with the different modes of nature. One has to rise, therefore, above the three material modes and become situated in the transcendental position. That is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another because he has material desires since time immemorial. But he has to change that conception. That change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The best example is here. Arjuna is hearing the science of God from Krishna, the living entity. If he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long-cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually and proportionately, as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. In the Vedic mantra, it is said that as he becomes learned in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he proportionately relishes his eternal, blissful life. Very interesting purport, you see. This explains why we are trapped in the material world. And then if we go forward a few more verses, it says, Anye trevam ajananta shrutvan yebhya upasate tepi chitit tarantyetva mrityum shruti parayanaha. Shruti parayanaha in the Sanskrit means inclined to the process of hearing. So then this verse says, this is 1326. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So we gave the example of Madhava Chandra. Before he became a devotee, his great pride was his wine cellar in his house. Right? But after coming in association with devotees and hearing classes on Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagvatam, his pride became owning the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagvatam. And he threw out all those wine bottles full of expensive wine. So you see, it all depends on regular hearing. See? So what is a school about? Regular hearing. By hearing what? Hearing mostly nonsense. See? So therefore, nothing good can come from that. Right? Because kids are programmed by that hearing from authorities. Well, the so-called authorities are teachers who eat meat and do all kinds of other things. What good is it? It's going to only contaminate their minds. And so this verse is particularly applicable to modern society because in modern society there's practically no education in spiritual matters. Some of the people may appear to be atheistic or agnostic or philosophical, but actually there is no knowledge of philosophy. So atheistic means you don't believe in God. Agnostic means you don't say God exists. You don't say he doesn't exist. You just say, I don't know. So I'm not going to say anything. But if you can convince me God exists, then I may believe in God. Or if you can convince me God doesn't exist, then I may believe that God doesn't exist. So an agnostic is in the middle. Right? As for the common man, if he is a good soul, then there is a chance for advancement by hearing. This hearing process is very important. Lord Chaitanya, who preached Krishna consciousness in the modern world, gave great stress to hearing because if the common man simply hears from authoritative sources, he can progress, especially according to Lord Chaitanya. If he hears the transcendental vibration Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It is stated there, therefore, that all men should take advantage of hearing from realized souls and gradually become able to understand everything. The worship of the Supreme Lord will then undoubtedly take place. Lord Chaitanya has said that in this age, no one needs to change his position, but one should give up the endeavor to understand the absolute truth by speculative reasoning. One should learn to become the servant of those who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. If one is fortunate enough to take shelter of a pure devotee, hear from him about self-realization and follow in his footsteps, one will be gradually elevated to the position of a pure devotee. In this verse, particularly, the process of hearing is strongly recommended, and this is very appropriate. Although the common man is often not as capable as the so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help one transcend this material existence and go back to Godhead, back to home. Wow. Well, there it is. It's clearly said here. Everything's in the Bhagavad Gita. So, therefore, in this purport to 10.13.53, it says, no one but Vishnu has any independence. If we develop consciousness of this fact, then we are in actual Krishna consciousness. We should always remember that Krishna is the only supreme master and that everyone else is his servant. Ekale Ishwara Krishna Arasabhabritya. But be one, even Narayana or Lord Shiva, everyone is subordinate. In other words, it's saying even Narayana or Lord Shiva, everyone is subordinate to Krishna. Shiva Varinchi Nutam, which means Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma also are subordinate to Krishna. But here they include also Narayana. Even Baladeva is subordinate to Krishna. This is a fact. One should understand that no one is independent, for everything is part and parcel of Krishna and is acting and moving by the supreme desire of Krishna. This understanding, this consciousness is Krishna consciousness. Okay. Well, do we accept this? That's the question. Then it says, Yastu Narayanam Devam Brahmarudradi Daivatai Samat Vinayava Riksita Sapasandi Bhavet Dhruvam. A person who considers demigods like Brahma and Shiva to be on an equal level with Narayana must certainly be considered an offender. No one can compare to Narayana or Krishna. Krishna is Narayana, and Narayana is also Krishna. For Krishna is the original Narayana. Brahma himself addressed Krishna, Narayanas tvam nahi sarva dehinam. You are also Narayana. Indeed, you are the original Narayana. Srimad Bhagvatam 10:14-14. Okay, so then it says, Kala, or the time factor, has many assistants, such as Sambhava, Samskara, Kama, Karma, and Guna. Swabhava, or one's own nature, is formed according to association of the material qualities. So this associating, just like, I remember there used to be this young boy, and when he was young, his father was bringing him here, and he was just an ordinary young boy, So his father would say, bow down now, bow down, and he would bow down. Right? So then, some years later, he became a teenager, and his father would come every once in a while. The boy never came. One day I met the boy out in the street, and he had one of these, what do you call those, it's a radio basically, but you can walk with it, and they put it up loud, or else they put it with earphones, right? And they're walking down the street and going like that, right? His body is reacting to the music, right? And there he was doing it. He's walking down like this, like that. And, he had the earphone on. So what happened to him? You see, he got zapped by Maya, by the school, and by the bad association in the school with other goofy people. And he has this joy box. I think they call it a joy box. It's a radio, but you know, it's running on batteries, and you
Jukebox.
what? No, it's not a jukebox. It's not. It's some other name. I'm not getting the right name. And you have the earphones on, and you're walking down the street, or sometimes they don't have the earphone. It's really loud. You know, they're walking down the street. Have you ever seen that? Yeah. Yeah. So this kid completely transformed. And it's all by hearing. Say, hearing nonsense and associating with nonsense people. So this is the swabhava. What does it mean? Swabhava, or one's own nature, is formed according to the association of the material qualities. So if you're associating always with passion or ignorance, then you end up like that kid, you know, walking down the street and jitterbugging like this and, you know, reacting to the music. And the words of the music are all nonsense. You see people drive by in a car, you know, the radio is really loud, and they're listening, maybe sometimes they're singing along with it, you know. It's crazy. That's keeping them in the material world, in the cycle of birth and death. So therefore it says, Karanam guna sangasya sadasad yoni janma. So that's what we read, 1322. He's quoting it here in the 10th canto, 13th chapter, 53rd verse, because that verse is very important. Sat and asat swabhava, one's higher or lower nature, is formed by association with the different qualities, namely sattva guna, raja guna, and tamaguna. We should gradually come to the sattva guna so that we may avoid the two lower gunas. This can be done if we regularly discuss Darwin's origin of mercy. No. Regularly discuss what? Srimad Bhagvatam. That's what we're doing. And hear about Krishna's activities. Nastapresu abhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya. Bhagavatam 1:2-18. We recite that every day, right? And it says, all the activities that Krishna described, all the activities of Krishna described in Srimad Bhagavatam, beginning even with the pastimes concerning Putana, are transcendental. Therefore, by hearing and discussing Srimad Bhagavatam, the Rajo Guna and Tamo Guna are subdued, so that only Sattva Guna remains. Then Raja Guna and Tama Guna cannot do us any harm. Shouldn't our kids learn this? Right? This is like basic knowledge that's necessary to be able to navigate through all the nonsense that's in this world. And we should take this very seriously, that this is Krishna consciousness. Now, next he goes to Varnashram Dharma. And Prabhupada says, or the purport says, Varnashram Dharma, therefore, is essential. Well, you'll see, even today, the devotees are still debating whether Varnashrama is Krishna conscious or not. They're still debating. They're still trying to figure out things. Where Prabhupada said that I've only done half my work, the other half is Varnashram Dharma. Why? Because it's a perfect system to help low-class people at least come up to the mode of goodness. That's the whole purpose of it. So Varnashram Dharma, therefore, is essential, for it can bring people to Sattva Guna. Tadarajas tamo bhava, kama loba dayaschaye. Bhagavatam 1:2-19. Tamaguna and Rajaguna increase lust and greed, which implicate a living entity in such a way that he must exist in the material world in many, many forms. This is very dangerous. One should therefore be brought to Sattva Guna by the establishment of Varnashram Dharma, and should develop the Brahminical qualifications of being very neat and clean, rising early in the morning and seeing Mangala Artrika, and so on. In this way, one should stay in Sattva Guna, and then one cannot be influenced by Tamaguna and Rajaguna. Tadarajas tamo bhava, kama loba dayaschiye, Chetetaranabhidam stitvam sattve prasiddhi. We recite this every morning, right? So what does this say? You know, by development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice are diminished. Srimad Bhagavatam 1:2-19. The opportunity for this purification is the special feature of human life. In other words, in other lives, this is not possible. It's only possible in the human form. Such purification can be achieved very easily by Radha Krishna Bhajana, devotional service rendered to Radha and Krishna. And therefore, Narottam Das Thakur sings Hari Hari Vipale Janama Goenu, indicating that unless one worships Radha Krishna, one's human form of life is wasted. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayat Yasa Vairagyam. This is Srimad Bhagavatam 1:2-7. All this is in the second chapter of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. By engagement in the service of Vasudeva or Krishna, one very quickly renounces material life. If the members of the Varnashram system, the process is much slower. In Krishna consciousness, the process is highly accelerated because we're directly worshiping Radha and Krishna. So in Varnashram system, you might start with the demigods and then eventually come up to Vishnu and Rukmini Krishna or Lakshmi Narayana, and then eventually come up to Krishna. And Radha and Krishna. So it says, by engagement in the service of Vasudeva, one quickly renounces material life. The members of the Krishna consciousness movement, for example, being engaged in Vasudeva Bhakti, very quickly come to the stage of being nice Vaishnavas. So much so that people are surprised that Malechas and Yavanas are able to come to this stage. This is possible by Vasudeva Bhakti. But if we do not come to the stage of Sattva Guna in this human life, then, as Narottam Das Thakur sings, Hari Hari Vipale Janama Goinu, there is no profit in gaining this human form of life. Sri Viraraghava Acharya comments that each of the items mentioned in the first half of this verse is a cause for material entanglement. Kala, or the time factor, agitates the modes of material nature, and Swabhava is the result of association with these modes. Therefore, Narottam Das Thakur says, Bhakta Sanivasa. If one associates with bhaktas, then one's Swabhava, or nature, will change. Our Krishna consciousness movement is meant to give people good association so that this change may take place, and we actually see that by this method, people all over the world are gradually becoming devotees. Haribol, Haribol, Haribol. Very important purport, and it's all corroborated by the Bhagavad Gita itself, where it says also, again in the 13th chapter, it says, 13:30, Pakrityaiva chakarmani kriya manani sarvasaha yapasyati tatatmanam akartaram sapasyati. And that means one who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. Now this, how many people would accept this? What do you mean? I'm not doing anything. My body is under the laws of nature is forcing me to do things. I don't accept that. But yet, it's a fact. This body is made, in the purport it says, this body is made by material nature under the direction of the Supersoul, and whatever activities are going on in respect to one's body are not his doing. Are not his doing. Whatever one is supposed to do, either for happiness or for distress, one is forced to do because of the bodily constitution. The self, however, is outside all these bodily activities. This body is given according to one's past desires. To fulfill desires, one is given the body with which he acts accordingly. Practically speaking, the body is a machine designed by the Supreme Lord to fulfill desires. Because of desires, one is put into different circumstances to suffer or to enjoy. This transcendental vision of the living entity, when developed, makes one separate from bodily activities. One who has such a vision is an actual seer. It's a very profound and very important point. So, the point here is that today no knowledge is given of what is the body, what are the modes of material nature, what is time, what is swabhava, what is kama, what is karma, and what is samskara, and what is guna. The knowledge is not given. So how can people live their life without this knowledge? They're forced to be in ignorance, and they're forced to continue to take birth and death. That's what's happening. And it's happening on a massive scale. Up to 99% of the population of the world is like that. And then, obviously, the animals and the plants and all they're all caught in the same cycle. They can't do anything about it until they come to the human form of life. And in the human form of life, there's no education. There used to be education in India. Even that has stopped, more or less. So it's very dangerous. And that's why Prabhupada says here that he says, this is very dangerous. It says, Tamaguna and Rajaguna increase lust and greed, which implicate a living entity in such a way that he must exist in this material world in many, many forms. This is very dangerous. One should therefore be brought to Sattva Guna by establishment of Varnashram Dharma, and should develop the Brahminical qualifications of being very neat and clean, rising early in the morning and seeing Mangala Artrika, and so on. In this way, one should stay in Sattva Guna, and then one cannot be influenced by Tamaguna and Rajaguna. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Okay, so this is all supplementary information. It is explaining, as part of our knowledge that we should have, what are Krishna's unique qualities. He's never influenced by the modes of material nature. He controls them. He's not influenced by time. He controls it. He doesn't have this swabhava, this nature by association, because he's transcendental to everything material. He never forgets who he is or what his purpose in life is. You know, he's not influenced by these outside influences. And then the kama, he's not influenced by the modes of material nature or lust, anger, greed, any of that. And then karma, he's not under the influence of previous material desires, being forced to be put into a material body because of that. And he's not influenced by the gunas, the three modes of material nature. So we see, but these things exist under his control, all these things, the time factor and the samskara and the swabhava and the kama and karma and guna. All these things are subordinate to him. So if we understand, so what do people do? The impersonalists say, well, Krishna, when he comes to the material world, where he appears, he has a material body. Right away to destroy this whole philosophy, right? And they also say that Krishna's body is material. So the whole thing is destroyed. The whole Vedic knowledge is destroyed just by those two statements. And that's what the Mayavadis say all the time. That's why they're the worst blasphemers of Krishna, worse than the atheists. They are the supreme atheists. Yeah. Okay, Hare Krishna, glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yes.
Two questions. One question. The first question is, as devotees are in mode of goodness, that's what we are trying to understand.
That's supposed to be, yeah.
So, meaning passion and ignorance, one may not be able to understand.
Well, wait a minute. How many people are listening right now? Just a handful of the congregation. So the ones that are not listening, well, maybe they've been listening to other people giving class, I don't know. But more or less, they're not listening on a daily basis in this what's the word Prabhupada uses here? It's focused listening. focused listening, right? Or attentive listening. So because of that, they have the tendency of falling into the lower modes of lust and ignorance.
So my question is
Passion and ignorance, yeah.
So my question is the Kshatriyas like Arjun, Yudhishthir, Maharaj, Bhishma Dev. So were they in mode of goodness or they were in passion because they were Kshatriyas? And they are pure devotees.
Well, who were they listening to?
Keep changing.
No, it all depends who they were listening to. So they were listening to Krishna, right? Krishna speaks the whole Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, right? So that he rises above. So he tells Arjuna, Nistraigunya Bhavarjuna, second chapter. What is that verse? Second chapter, he says, 45th verse, yeah. Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistraigunya Bhavarjana, Nirdvandva, Nityasatvaso, Nir-yoga Shema Atman. So it says, the Vedas deal mainly with the subject of the three modes of material nature, O Arjuna. Become transcendental to these three modes. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. So he's telling him, rise above the gunas, come to the transcendental level. And how do you do that? Well, we just read today. It says, that it's by his regular hearing. Therefore, by hearing and discussing Srimad Bhagavatam, the Rajaguna and Tamaguna are subdued so that only Sattva Guna remains. Then Rajaguna and Tamaguna cannot do us any harm. And then even Sattva Guna, you can begin to learn about Krishna, and then the more you hear, then eventually you rise up from Sattva Guna to transcendental goodness, Suddha Sattva. Then you're free. And by continual hearing every day, you remain on that level. Right? Because we're reminded day after day. I mean, just we're going over all these things. And you see, by progressively going through Srimad Bhagavatam, our understanding becomes deeper and deeper. So that's the whole point.
And especially, Maharaj, this going over this same verse from last few days, it's helping a lot to go deeper into the same subject.
Yeah, that's why we stopped on this verse, verse 27. Every day now, it's like over a week now, and then we'll go on for a few more days to cover this, because it's, Krishna's position is unique. No one is equal to him or greater than him. If we understand that, what does it say? What did it say here? It said, no one but Vishnu has any independence. If we develop consciousness of this fact, then we are in actual Krishna consciousness. We should always remember that Krishna is the only supreme master, and that everyone else is his servant. Ekale Ishvara Krishna Arasabhabritya. Be one even Narayana or Lord Shiva, everyone is subordinate to Krishna. Shiva Varinchinutam. Even Baladeva is subordinate to Krishna. This is a fact. So, but how is he greater than everyone else? That's what we have to understand, and that's what we're understanding here. The second canto especially is explaining this in many ways, in great detail. Haribol.
One small question.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned samskara, material samskara and spiritual samskara.
There's sat samskara and asat samskara. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita also.
What are spiritual samskaras?
What you're doing now, right? Associating with Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita and hearing it from the devotees. That's the superior samskara. And lower samskara is, you do Satyanarayana puja and this puja and that puja for material benefits, so that your beastly desires can be satisfied without committing too much horrible karmic activities. Yeah.
We did it, Maharaj, in the last 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. That's the lower, that's the asat samskara. you know.
Right. Thank you.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Bandhu Mui Savadana Te Bandhu Mui Savadana Mate Janara Prasade Bhai E Bhavatoriya Jai Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya Arana Koriya Maneya Sa Arana Koriya Maneya Sa Shri Guru Charane Rati Ese Uttama Gati Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asa Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Sa Chakshudana Dilaje Janme Janme Prabhu se Divye Gyan de Prokasito Prema Bhakti Chahaite Avidya Vinasa Jate Vedika Janara Charito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Lokanath Lokera Jivana Ha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Padachaya Ebeya Sagusakchi Bhuvana Ha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Padachaya Ha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Padachaya Ebeya Sagusakchi Bhuvana Due Padila Starana Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bolo Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jayam Mishnapad Paramahansa Pararajika Chasta Saraswati Shishi Shimadis Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Sikho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Swami Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Shri Mayapura Dham ki jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Tulasi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ganga Maya ki jai, Jamuna Maya ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktavinda ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to Assembled Lord, all glories to Assembled Lord, all glories to Assembled, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavana ki jai. Namam The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection and fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. sing of his character. Our spiritual master, the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and Lord and master of devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter of your lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada, Patita Bhavana, Kinche. Gaura Premanandi, Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama,